Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Chris Carter. I am on the board of the Seattle Interactive Conference, and it's my pleasure to introduce this next panel, aligning to multi-screen customer journeys. With me on the panel here, I have Carrie Byrne from Seattle Wunderman Network. I also have Geoff Harrison from Blink, who's their lead creative, and Paul Booth with iconmobile, lead of strategy over there. So hoping to have a very interesting UX panel around how people are going to, or how people should design to cater for the fact that users and people are basically using multiple screens at the same time. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the guys to lead us on this panel.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Perfect. So when I used to start talking, or when I started talking to clients about multi-screen and mobile a few years ago, the conversation I always used to have with them typically started with me trying to persuade them about why mobile was something they needed to do. And in fact, that would be an awful lot of our conversation. And things changed a lot in the last year, 6 months. And you know, I think that when we ask ourselves why, we have to look back at this paradigm shift that occurred back in 2007, you know, 6 or so years ago, 7 years. And you know, when we think about phones and mobile and devices at the time, and you know, these are the two handsets that were popular, that were released in 2007, we had a big shift from features and technology to something that was much more relevant, much more emotional, and much more connective than we had before. And I'll revisit why this was so important. But a big shift occurred to personal computing at the time, and the sort of definition of personal computing went from being something that was sitting on our desks or our laps to something that we carried around in our pocket, something actually much more personal. You know, and it's greatly understood now at this point in time that how we use those different channels is very different. So, you know, we know that, and I'm sure you guys all understand that people who are sitting on their desktops, on their laptop computers are consuming content in a far different way than we tend to with the things that we carry around with us all the time. Our needs are different, and the information that we consume, therefore, needs to be different. These devices that we have and these new channels are far more about urgency, about things that I need to do now, or things that are easy for me to do because all I have to do is reach in my pocket. And, you know, my two colleagues over here are going to give you some great tools for unpacking some of this stuff. We know that our journeys to purchase are far different and more complex than we ever thought they were before. And more importantly, we know that after purchase, how we relate to brands has really changed because of this thing that we now carry around, this capability, this connectivity that we carry around with us all the time. I think Nike are one of the best examples recently of this, and you know, the Fuel Band really expanded what they've done as a post-purchase customer journey, and they really have reinvented themselves from being a shoe company, a apparel company, to selling this category of fitness. And major reinvention of how we think about Nike and who the brand is now open to, all because of this move, this shift that occurred. And it's not just Nike. Other people are at it too. BMW are moving from selling automobiles and having the automobile as being their thing to selling services and mobility. And things that layer on top of the automobile, so they know that they need to add value. So this is really interesting because when I think about why this is all happening, and I think about all the way back to 2007 with the launch of the iPhone, it almost feels like a disruptive bow wave was kicked off by the launch of that device that now is catching up with us as those devices become the first thing that people use. So we have this real idea that that the information you consume, that the device you consume it on, that your ability to interact with a brand over time is all changing. And when I speak to customers now, the smartest ones are coming to me and asking not why mobile, but how do I change my organization? How do I change my structure so that we can reorganize ourselves in order to connect with you or our customers at any time? And that's a really powerful thing. And it's powerful because it's sort of happening at a perfect time, a perfect storm, as we have this generational shift to millennials. So this breeding ground for disruptive innovation is fresh, and people just don't care as much about brand experience as they did before. So we have to be really careful. Yeah. Do
you want to explain the cat?
Oh yeah, and it was a catapult. Now it's a cat. Yeah, and I don't know if you guys are familiar, but Uber today had a service where they would deliver kittens to your office. I think Uber is a really good example of how you can come and disrupt an incredibly old and established service with taxis. Who would have thought that a company could come along and completely reinvent the taxi experience? And Uber have been very successful in doing this. And today, I think they proved that their model doesn't just apply to catching a ride. It actually could be anything, any kind of commodity that you want to have come to your office. Today, it was cats, which you could adopt. I tried to get cats delivered to our office, but they were all, unfortunately, busy being cuddled elsewhere. But yeah, I guess the question for brands, and the question I think you guys would, or I think you guys need to think a lot about is, do you want to be Nike, like the first to market, the disruptor, or do you want to be the follower? And what does it really, what really needs to change in order for that to happen? And I know that's some of the topics that we'll be touching on in a minute. But more often than not, in my engagement with brands, we have a client who's very eager to move forward with this type of thing until we sit down and really map out what that means. Again, we'll touch on this in a second, but when it comes down to actually making those changes and flipping their organization to think about being always on, always connected, and to building an ecosystem of products and services that work together instead of a traditional product lifecycle where I launch something and then go away, forget about it, and come back, a year later with my next version. A lot of people just aren't ready to make that conversion. So how does that work, and how do you flip those organizations and change them? And it's not just these big firms that produce automobiles and big ticket items like cars and shoes. It's also chocolate. It's consumer packaged goods, and across the board. So I think that's the challenge for us all.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that great setup. I'm Carrie Byrne, and I'm here today to share with you a little bit more of the pragmatics as it has to do with how we bring clients from appreciating, maybe fearing, but really wanting to honor and harness the power of this paradigm shift into their business in a very practical way. What I've been working on about the past year and a half is really trying to take a closer look at how users are moving between screens. We've seen a lot of reports lately. Google Think has done a nice job of distributing those things. Maybe some of you subscribe to their feed. And we understand that we are completing tasks across the life cycle of our day from device to device to device. It starts in the morning, it moves into the commute, it goes to our work setting or our remote work setting. We collaborate with colleagues, we touch family, we commute at the tail end of the day, and then we have many times screen time as we consume broadcast media in the evening, and then a little bit of mobile time before bed, or at least that's always the case in my household, regrettably. So the always on has really started to dismantle what UX practitioners, I think, had really embraced for a very long time in linear task flow, task analysis, and looking at time on task. Much of those anchor points in how we define task have really been replaced by a more fluid, a more continual, and a more nonlinear, essentially, experience. And so we as practitioners, I think this is our opportunity to function as change agents. We're not responsible for change management within the organization of our clients, but we sure can bring some light and some very crisp realities, both from a quantitative and a qualitative side to our clients, to give them the power to voice the need to design across this nonlinear experience. So as we look at more screens being used to consume our experiences, we think about more design principles. And this is something that I've been working on with some of my colleagues, and Geoff, Paul, and I had some really productive conversations. This is a moving and organic sort of set of heuristics, if you will, as our device changes. We know that we're consuming, the mechanism that we're using to consume is really evolving and morphing. Thank goodness Nielsen published those, the top 10 interaction heuristics. Those continue to be tried and true. I think a lot of folks would still debate them, but I think arguably at the core, we still come back to those. They are our touchstones. I think particularly my favorite is recognition over recall, but isn't it interesting how convention has changed? We are now accepting or expecting service sign-in to live in certain quadrants or certain areas of our screen, depending on what device we're in. Now we're seeing that recognition is shifting as our maturity with device enhances and moves along. So I have Nielsen's list on the left, but then we move to touch screen. I have done some research and based on others' very academic and very rigorous research. What are some of the principles that we can use to evaluate how successful or how limiting some of our clients' experiences are for that touchscreen experience? Have you optimized for? Have you considered where our customer is, our end user is, as they're engaging with that screen? And here I have a list of some of those design principles that I think can be folded into a broader evaluation of end-to-end experience. And then finally, context of use. I've studied graphic design for many years. Frankly, I have a master's in design. And coming out of the field of EGD, environmental graphic design, and thinking about signage and the environment in which retail has really taken hold of these immersive, just profoundly fabulous experience, we can evaluate that environment, the physical environment, according to a set of principles as well. I offer these up to you as fodder. It's not a fixed list, it's changing, but I think what multi-screen does is it causes us to reevaluate, go back to our roots and say, is this enough, or do I need to look at the experience with a different lens or an augmented toolkit? Here's an example of what that might be.
Yeah, I really like this too, because when I think about this problem, it's more than just about the physical phone, right? The phone was the thing that kind of the first catalyst of this always-on personal computing, right? But tomorrow it could be a pair of glasses, it could be a special contact lens, or I don't know, maybe an implant in my brain. Who knows? And I really like the way you're going with this list, because it kind of shows that this input mechanism is going to change over time, but the basic principle of always on is the thing that that's the changing function here.
Yeah, thank you. So as we move from many screens, many principles, some of them new, some of them resurrected, we have a call for experience mapping. And I mentioned earlier, a linear task flow is no longer so much what's needed today to evaluate how successful our client experiences are. But in our planning phase, we want to think about bringing to bear many points of view around this problem that our clients struggle with so frequently. My experience isn't doing enough. We aren't carrying the water there. And we, as UX practitioners, can say, well, I need to know more. What do you need to know? I've had clients sit back and say, give me your list, I'll send you the reports. So I think what's helping me be more and more successful in launching into these discussions around where the opportunities lie across multi-screen experience is getting real crisp on what the inputs are in the planning phase, very early on, in what can be really useful to understanding if you're having a hit or if you're having a complete miss. Voice of customer, boy, I can't tell you how many times I've been with somebody who's managing a call center or the chat reps. Those folks are the window to the world of your problem. And they can tell you conversationally or in final quarter end, year-end results, what's happening and where the trends are. Those folks are like the administrative gatekeeper to your future of more successful customer experience, in my opinion. Social listening. Any customer interviews, even interceptor interviews. I'm a goober. I like to get out of the office. Goob, get out of the box. Go talk to somebody who just walked away from that kiosk. Don't be afraid to mix it up a little bit and be that researcher on the ground. The UX insights that we can bring to bear to this challenge of initial evaluation and this initial problem ID, maybe we can apply from the slide earlier, those design principles in embarking on a cognitive walkthrough. Our colleagues, we can engage this ourselves. We can go through an evaluation and bring forward some more, they're definitely going to be a little subjective. We know too much, but I think they're very, very valid findings to bring forward to a client that can amplify things that we hear from other channels. Our business goals. So often our buying client doesn't compare notes enough with his or her colleagues. So the segment stakeholders, the people that are spending the money to do the market research, those folks may have insight into the business drivers that are bringing product to market in a particular way. Reach out to them. Reach out to them with a business counterpart if necessary, but I think they're often a stone left unturned in this planning process for UX. Market research, I mentioned that just a moment ago. Don't forget our competitive research. I have some clients right now that will jump through multiple hoops with their senior leadership if they see that a primary competitor launched something this morning. Get on the phone, be proactive, or be reactive in the moment when it can really matter. And our analytics, I think those are sort of obvious ones. But again, getting quite crisp in our planning stage can help us have all of the pillars to our stool to then deliver a platform for our roadmap that Geoff is going to talk about soon. So as we think about experience map inputs, that means that we're abandoning the linear task flow or at a macro level. There might be discrete linear chunks that can occur within that experience map or journey, but I think we're laddering up from this to something that looks more like this. Now, this is a customer journey, and it is informed by all the inputs that you saw on the previous slide with the 5 bubbles. So is this telling the story of an individual? Hopefully no. Hopefully this is a story in aggregate. Hopefully we can have the client put a little stock in this story having some validity. Now what we see, I'll just break this down, and this is an experience map, it's of my design. There are many ways to cut this cloth. This is not the only structure, the only template in our toolkit, and I hope to continue to evolve it. But what you're seeing at the very top, a gradient, is the time that it's taking to get this customer through a pretty recognized funnel sort of pipeline from discovery all the way through purchase and adoption of a cloud storage solution. It's something we all kind of can understand and know about. We may have compared Dropbox with SkyDrive capabilities. We may have had some trepidation around freemium models. We are asking ourselves some of these questions. Do those questions also come out through the audience insights that we have? So time across the top, we've got a swim lane in the top third that's broken by device. So today, and this could change, today we're talking about the interplay between our mobile phone, our tablet, and our PC. This could really come to bear through a lot of different mechanisms. That's the snapshot that this is representing. So keep in mind that it too can evolve. Then we have our funnel. And the actions and the questions are the two core content sources that we really hone in and evaluate with our clients to see, did we get it right in our planning? And then after we launch an optimized design, we'll revisit this and see how strongly we're mapping to that reality moving forward. But I think this is a very interesting way to bring to light to clients through an opportunity map overlay, if you will. Here's where you're falling down. Here's where customer may not be fully satisfied or getting their needs met. Geoff will share an example with you shortly where we get more granular and into that level of meeting needs and customer satisfaction. The two key things that I think are really critical here is in true keeping with nonlinear journey, there's a couple spin cycles in here. In the learn phase, in the evaluate phase, we could identify that a customer could check multiple times through, is this the right solution for me? I'm not sure. I talked to somebody at the office, or I saw somebody tweeting about something else. I'm going to have to really come through and through and through this cycle until I'm certain, and then I might have another spin in the next phase of my journey. And I'll blow this out for you and share just a simple example. But this is our prosumer, Ryan, and he's shown here on his tablet, but let's say, for the sake of this illustration, he's also consumed this same content on his mobile phone and on his PC. He's wondering about reviews, opinions of the product. He's going to be consuming that information on the commute, when he's on lunch break, when he's at home in the evening. Is this a 5-star service? 5 stars that's our currency. 5-star app, 5-star rating, 5-star, who's saying good things about this, and who are the detractors? And do they have merit? Do they hold currency in the circles I keep? Apps. I might be in market for a new device. Maybe I'm switching platforms. Is the app that I'm using in iOS as good as the one that has been released for Android, or vice versa? Or Windows Phone? Does the app exist? Is it there yet? And what are the customers saying about that? And so on and so forth, moving into the other devices. Price comparison. This is something that our clients are grappling with regularly. Downward pressure, new entrants, people that, other clients that are doing vertical integration into their space. They didn't see them coming, or maybe they've been there, but their model is yet to be proven. Wondering, is the pricing going to stay? Are they going to change that? Who needs to know? And then furthermore, when there is a freemium model implied, how does it feel to trade on your friends? I think some of the studies that I've seen on the freemium model in particular have revealed that there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do it. We can guide our clients to help understand that as we introduce the transactional process to get extra storage if you share it with a couple friends and give it to the supplier for their list. Then finally, the site content itself. We have to help our clients adhere in their delivery of content to I think the design principles that we served up earlier, so that we are delivering a quality experience that reads through the stuff on the page to that end user as a product of value and a company that is going to go the distance. So this is just one example of how a customer may explore across all these channels, in some cases even simultaneously, this particular cycle that I had shared earlier, just in the learn phase. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to my comrade, Geoff.
Okay. So, as you can imagine, with in thinking about this, and as we've been talking about this, there's a lot to consider. And we all have clients that come to us, and we start talking about these things and all the things they need to consider, and there's kind of this oh shit moment of how are we going to do that? And culturally, there's so much to consider with my organization. I thought, I own this product on mobile. I wanted you to help me out and redesign the mobile component, and now you're telling me it needs to fit in with everything else my company is doing. And so that means, thinking about all the other aspects of my business that are going to be impacted with that. And I think what we're saying here, all of us, is yes, you do. You need to bring in and think about all the different parts of the business that have impact on the product or service that you're offering. And Paul brought up a couple of great examples of companies that have started to make this shift, right? Where they, BMW, huge company, but just thinking about, we're not selling automobiles, we're selling mobility, and thinking about, how the brand has something to rally around. But what I'm going to do, to kind of put a lens on this, is to get sort of tactical here in terms of how we start thinking about taking something from that experience map level, which lays out a landscape and a way to view the multi-screen customer journey, and how you're going to move that, or how we work with clients to move that into a design roadmap. And a design roadmap would be, something that gets really tactical in terms of, this is how we want to go forward and implement on these different channels. So, I'm going to talk about the elements and role of the experience map, and then how we take those experience maps and move them into a design roadmap and create design roadmaps. So the first thing, Carrie had an example of an experience map, and I'm going to show a couple other ones here too. The role of the experience map is to visualize the journey for the organization, right? To visualize how these different channels and platforms fit into that customer journey. And as like on Carrie's showed, the different digital touch points, the mobile touch points, desktop, tablets, context of use, and how we see those. And then the other thing Experience Maps needs to do is it needs to inform that design, or the design roadmap, right? So the tactical piece of how we move forward. And so the elements of that experience map are the customer journey stages. So how we think about, where our customer is when we're bringing them in, trying to, in the early parts of their engagement with the service, through to fulfillment. And a lot of my clients think of it as a customer life cycle, right? So they're, for instance, we're working with a cruise line right now that thinks, you're going to investigate and buy a cruise, but then after that, we want you to take another one, right? So you're going back through the life cycle. Talk about device touch points. We just talked about that, the different channels that people are on. the customer goals and motivations. This varies by stage, right? So that's the other reason to have a map across the different stages, because the goals and motivations change on the stage, based on the stages. And then sentiment. How are they feeling at those different stages? We can actually, done research, and I'll show some examples of this, where you can generalize how someone feels at different parts of that customer life cycle and create experiences for them that match how they feel. And then probably the most important thing to getting to a design roadmap are what are the opportunities. And again, this is across that customer life cycle, or across the stages there. So here's an example of a map kind of all up, where we've got the stages across the top, user goals in the next layer, and then touch points in the middle. And then at the bottom, you can see the satisfaction level. And this is for a project that we're doing with a client in Brazil, for buying and renting real estate. So the real estate process is a little bit different down there. But one of the things that's sort of interesting, we did a bunch of research in homes and with people down in Brazil about this, is that they talk to their families a lot during the process, but they also, as you can imagine, as they're looking for real estate, at first it's really exciting, to look for a new apartment or house, but at some point that gets really tedious when you're not finding what you're looking for, or you find out that your price range isn't going to be able to afford what you want to buy. So you actually have a dip in how happy they are in looking for a house. It doesn't have to do with how happy they are with my service, but it has to do with their mental model, during that process. And then when they find something, it goes back up to get excited to move in, and then services and things like that. So that's a really interesting point then, to think about how we're going to design this experience for them and how we're going to lift them up when we know they're kind of in the doldrums and have been on our site and have, for 3 months looking for a place, how we communicate with them. Under this, which is cut off, there are the opportunities, and I'm going to get to that, but that's another really important part. So in this one, is a little bit different. This is about a city visit app, and so it's a little bit more similar to the one Carrie brought up. And I think the thing to think about here is that the other thing with the experience maps is that we don't go into them with a very specific idea of how they are going to look, right? You do the research, you look at the analytics, all the 5 parts or 6 parts that you talked about.
5 parts.
Right, the analytics, the business goals, all that stuff, to figure out what this map is going to start looking like. But we don't go in with a preconceived notion. But here, with these, the pre-travel experience, this is research, can be done on laptops, talking to family and friends, on mobile, on the way to work, reading books, right? So it's a loop. We don't know exactly how long that takes before they're going to have planned the trip and do the trip. And then, while they're on the trip, people do different things and access things in different ways. And then after they're done, writing reviews, going back, and thinking about the next trip. But I'm going to break this down. So this is the first layer, where we have the stages, and then we also have I would call this the touch points layer here with the different devices. And then we get into what their goals and motivations are. You're not going to be able to read this probably, but the important thing is that they have different goals and motivations based on where they are in the life cycle of that journey, and it's really important to sort of start to map that out. These are going to directly affect what, from a UX standpoint, we would think about developing user stories. So if we're going to develop a story about pre-travel, it's going to be based on the activities that they're doing in the pre-travel phase. again, sentiment can actually, we tend to use these pretty broad stroke sentiment maps, just how people are feeling about it. But you can get really granular here too, all kinds of adjectives and other ways to look at it. And then the last thing are the opportunities. As a design team and as a client product team and working together on things, where are we going to be different? Where are we going to differentiate at the different stages? Where are the opportunities? And really pulling those out. I think that's a really important part of the mapping process, to think about how are we going to design this and move this forward. So to get to a roadmap from that experience map view, we need to prioritize the opportunities. The first thing that we need to do. So we've come up with a lot of different ideas, but based on the business value, the customer value, and potentially the technical value, how hard it is to create these things, we need to prioritize them. And second, we need to identify the pain points on the map. And, I said that incorrectly, or the wrong way. Identify the pain points on the map and then prioritize the business opportunities to them based on those three things: the business, customer, business, and technical value. So oftentimes for us, this is a matrix, right, of thinking about things in that way. So from that, we want to create new customer stories. So these are stories that are going to help us map out what it looks like at the different stages of the process. So we want to storyboard how someone would ideally move through and feel in the new experience. And we want to ensure that the story encompasses the prioritized opportunities. So for us, this is often at a really sketch stage, right, where we're thinking about a user story, how they might access something on mobile and then pull it up on the desktop and what's available to them there based on what they've already seen on mobile. We'll go through and really storyboard out how we think this looks. And these stories, the way to think about them is that multi-device stories generally build on each other. In other words, one way to think about the multi-device landscape, while it's really complex, is that you can imagine stories where, based on context, we've got someone going to work, they're accessing something on mobile. At work, they might access it on the desktop, or at home on tablets. We know this from our analytics. We know it from our contextual inquiry interviews. We can find these things out, but they tend to build on each other, right? So we do have some things where, with TV, I think we would say people access things, simultaneously, but generally we've got context that's setting that for us, and it goes at some place in the story. Second thing is, think of the stories first and the devices second. So what's important is the journey that they're taking, the information that they're seeking, not thinking about and worrying about what device they're on. That's not the primary pivot. The primary pivot is the experience and what they're trying to get done. And then think of the devices second. And then the third thing is, be clear where each story fits into the customer experience lifecycle. So again, that's where it is in the map, and really gives you a clear idea, because these things are large. They take, thinking about a product this way is complex. So oftentimes our stories are, have to do with a part of that journey. We get down to that level.
Yeah, I really like this because it really drives home something that I see a lot. Like when I talk to clients, they'll say, well, I really want to invest in this mobile thing, but I'm going to have to take money out of this other channel in order to put it over here into this mobile thing, and I'm not sure I can do that. And I think what you're showing is that is entirely the wrong approach, because you don't want to think about these as being different channels, although they are. It's one customer journey, and you have to ignite it. right?
Right.
You have to ignite it wherever your customers are. So you can't think about it as being, well, this is the mobile team and they have a budget, and this is the in-store team and they have a budget. It's one customer journey, it's one bucket of money, and it's one way of approaching a customer. And I think a lot about the Walgreens example, and I'm sure you guys are familiar, but they found that customers who connect to the brand across multiple screens, across multiple channels, are far much more valuable all up to Walgreens than single channel customers, which kind of just goes to show, you can't think about it as being separate budgets. It's one budget, one journey, one customer. Yeah, I love this.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and I think part of this is getting people to think about the experience map is a way to visualize, these customer journeys, right? And while it's got a device layer in there, we are trying to sort of decouple that, to think about the stories, think about what we're trying to communicate. And as Paul said, take the devices as sort of the second layer to that. We do need to supply experiences for the different platforms, but there's some interesting uses of that, and I think the Walgreens example is a great one, where things can be done responsively, or there's a lot of decisions to be made after you decide what those journeys are. And then I'm going to end with this, just about what we think a design roadmap looks like. I think it includes the experience map. We kind of looked at some examples of that. Those take different forms. Illustrated customer stories, those are those storyboards, thinking about how different types of customers will experience this on different devices, thinking about those stories. A feature matrix, which often you can divide by channel, right? So when you have the stories and have the context, some features aren't needed in certain contexts, while others are, right? And then from all these, you can also develop, really a detailed design, prototyping, and testing plan. And so, the way we think about it is, what channels are we going to be designing for first, and how are we going to roll this out? And this gets to, I think, also to, Paul's point about, do that prioritization after, right? And you can, from a business standpoint, you can decide, how you're going to do this, but all things need to be considered at some level. Okay, well, I think we're ready. We've been talking a lot. Ready for any questions that you have. I think there's a microphone here if people want to come up and ask us questions. I mean, we've got some questions that we could pose too, but if anyone.
Hey guys, thank you. That was very interesting. I wanted to talk a little about social and mobile. Those of us in the advertising, I'll speak personally, but in my experience in advertising, we don't know enough about them yet to know how to use them in the customer journey. It's changing so rapidly. You think you've got a handle on the environment, and then it changes massively again. So going back to what you were saying earlier about the single story, how do we deal with an environment where we're not comfortable in 2 out of the platforms that we're supposed to be serving up that single story?
In what context? Why don't you have enough information about them in terms of, give like an example of that?
I think when planning advertising campaigns, there is a sort of, I guess, there's a rush to comfort. You know these you know how to put a campaign together. We know it's TV, we know it's radio, we know it's digital, etc.
Right.
But social and mobile, in some ways, are the frontiers there where things are changing and evolving. And I think often for advertisers, if we're not comfortable with it, we tend to shy away from it.
Yeah, I think one of the Paul kind of spoke about this, which is a really difficult thing for clients, but being the disruptors in the space, and being kind of bleeding edge or leading edge with client ideas is, I think, comes into this the risk that they're willing to take, right? So part of it is based on data and what we think, but how can we prove it to them before we launch a campaign or do something disruptive? I think it's difficult to do that, and also maybe difficult to, but I would say pointing to others' examples. Starbucks just launched, a Tweet a Coffee campaign this week, right? Which I always think, they're always willing to take a risk. That campaign may fail, right? So I guess what it comes down to is convincing our clients in these businesses that there's a lot of value to be had in trying some of these things, right? And going for it. And you have to throw a little bit of caution to the wind, I think, right? There's not always going to be the absolute data of how effective we know that this is going to be. But, if it gets picked up, we're putting it in a channel, and we're, where we think that it's got potential to really, drive some change or to drive a lot of, positivity for the business.
And I think more often than not, your customers are already doing these things. So it's less about, coming up with something new, like what is the social mobile campaign that's going to answer this question that my client has. It's more about what are the target audience already doing on their path to purchase, and can I enable them to do it more effectively, and can I be part of that conversation maybe? That Tweet a Coffee example is a good example, because Starbucks are looking at Twitter, they're looking at how people share news between their social networks and friends, and how people like to be advocates for something that their brand is doing, and they're trying to ladder onto that. I think that, to the point of this whole journey mapping conversation, it's like, look, there's a journey happening there for Starbucks for how people share, and they're trying to ignite it. And they're using the fact that they know that you're on your device in the store, and they know that you like to share using Twitter, hopefully, about deals and offers and make yourself look good. They're trying to ignite themselves with that. So, I think that's the kind of point. What are they already doing? How do I capture it? How do I integrate it? Great question.
I think something else that we can look at from the UX corner of the world is in our audience profiling. What do we know about the behaviors and the patterns that start to develop a framework for connection with that customer? Are they doing something that is taking a step toward our shared end goal with them, with that client business? If it's going to derail, if it's going to take you off course, is that a risk the brand is willing to take? So I think that's a really worthy exercise, is to evaluate with great scrutiny, what are the social habits of that target audience? Something else that I think is really worth considering, and we didn't really touch on it in the customer journey mapping process so much, but what is the organizational readiness to deliver in continuity? When your campaign has reached the end of its life cycle, is there a group in the marketing department? Is there somebody who's being tasked with the role of always on to basically keep the pilot light going and even fuel that more? Because the worst thing we want to promote is a conversation that starts and then just falls flat. So we may start to uncover some of those gaps from an organizational standpoint. I don't think it's our job as UX practitioners to solve that, but certainly escalating to the right folks who can pull the right levers to get an operational plan to keep continuity alive, because that's a risk to the brand that I don't think is a worthy risk to take.
Yeah, it's interesting you touch on mobile and social in particular, because I think that they are two technologies, two channels that are coming to fore now that really cause brands to have to rethink how they come to market. And the last big rethink was maybe with the web, and now we have this always-on constant channel for communicating that really is making people rethink how they do what they do. So I think those two in particular are really forcing us as agencies, and then even more so our clients, to rethink how they approach the market, how they go to the market, right? So really very interesting, I think. And in a lot of cases, we'll see clients who are really, you've got a client who really wants to do something. They're really into this mobile thing and they want to do it. And when we start to develop these maps and these journeys, you very quickly realize that they don't have the infrastructure in place, they don't have the content ready, they aren't ready to do this. And that's when the campaign you kind of come to this really uncomfortable halt.
Piggybacking on that, if they don't have the infrastructure to deliver on it, yet through audience profiling and behavior patterning, you can demonstrate that the client organization can monetize through that channel. Boy, that's a really nice story for somebody to take to their director, to open the eyes of where opportunity really lies from a standpoint of enriching that channel with
I
customer.
agree, and I think we're often guilty, more often than not, of just scaring them, right? And being like, oh my God, you don't have any, we can't do this, right? It's such a big undertaking, you've got to do all this stuff, and then instead of undergoing that change that they need to actually communicate this way, they just don't do anything. And then you're stuck with the next year's campaign.
Can you talk a little bit more about connecting the dots between devices? You were mentioning how you build upon it. Usually you start on your phone and then you do more research on the desktop, and you know what I mean? How do you know it's the same customer going through the process and where they are in that process without having them log in every device?
That's a good question.
I guess the first question is, do you care, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the first thing I want to know is, and some brands really do care. Like they want to view this as being a customer on a journey, and I will change my information that I present to you over time. Another approach is just to say, well, we know that people are going to want different types of conversation, different types of information on different types of devices or at different times of day. So we'll change the types of content we serve, but we don't care if it's continuity with one customer end to end. So I think that's the question. And then you get to a point at which, of course, someone makes a purchase. Then you have the opportunity to know them, and then the post-cycle conversation is very different, right? The post-purchase conversation.
Right.
What do you guys think?
Well, I think to tier one, like you said, is even if we don't know that it's the same customer at these different touch points, tier one is, do we have the same strategy? Different touch points, is the content consistent? Are we delivering it in a consistent way that's familiar to them? So if I'm, for instance, doing research on a product, we had a couple different examples, right, of sites or services they would do some research before making a purchase. It may not, to Paul's point, it may not be important that I know you as much as my messaging is consistent between the different platforms and how I deliver it. The second thing is I really see there's a big movement now to a lot of our clients in thinking about how do we capture people at the right points, right, in that cycle, right? And then we really can do something to them to deliver an experience that is more consistent and know them. But the idea that cookies doesn't solve everything, and we can't understand how we need with cookies that marry up your mobile device to your tablet to your desktop. But there's interesting ways, and you'll see this in look at like Hipmunk, travel sites, someone like Kayak. They put these things in as features to give your email address. Would you like to, if you give us your email address, we can give you an update on when the cheapest flight becomes available for this route you're looking at, right? So giving some value back to the customer of why we might want to take some data from you to communicate back to you. And now we've got a channel there where we can track you across device and start to talk to you really communicate to you as one of our customers, right? And know you. Oh, you were looking for flights to San Francisco. Same thing on different devices. Now, of course, we need to authenticate on them, but there's interesting ways we're trying to give value back to connect these experiences together. Does that make any sense, what I just said?
It did.
Okay.
I think so. Something else that I've seen our clients talk about more and more are their big bets. And it's funny to consider in enterprise gambling, But in many cases, we don't know everything that we'd like to. And so we need to build informed hypotheses. And I've started to turn to our measurement and analytics groups. They can bring a lot of insight to the challenges we think we're onto. They can help maybe anchor a corner of that or give us a couple tests to run. I think that it's valid today, given how technology in some instances is nascent, and we're operating with best case scenarios and hypotheses that are informed to the degree that we can make them as such. But bear in mind, companies are talking about their big bets, and it sometimes amounts to a little bit of that.
Yeah, it is really funny when you think about what happens to analytics with this model, right? Because we typically talk about visits and visitors and return visits. Well, you don't know anymore. Like, you don't know. You could have one person visiting on 3 different devices. You count them 3 times. As a unique user, you don't count them as one visitor over 3 visits. Right. So this whole model we've had of reporting kind of falls down, now. And it becomes more indicative than, real. And I think that we sort of have to start to figure this stuff out. And also maybe just relax a little bit. We probably aren't going to solve some of these problems, and hopefully some people that own the platforms will, but we'll never, until that happens, I think all we need to do is figure out what the best experience is for the right person at the right time and try and serve it. And that's probably about as good as you're going to get, unless you're in Amazon and you've got somebody signed in across multiple devices and you can track them.
I think it's really a call to action for user research, taking your hypotheses into the field or into the lab environment and observing and going back to kind of square one, the essentials in this practice. I think there's a call for that quite a bit.
Anyone else?
My company just recently, in this past year, did a member experience map,
Yep.
walking through all the different pain points for different products that we offer.
Yep.
How often would you recommend that a company would go through a process like that? Because it's very painstaking.
Right.
Going through that.
He wants you to pay for it all the time,
That's
like
right.
every 3 months.
Always on.
Yeah. Well, I think once we were just doing one recently for a client, and there was a lot of this that was done, even 5-6 years ago that we really could just build right off of, right? I mean, a lot of their business hasn't changed, so we know a lot about customers, but some of the inputs do change and behaviors change, and so I think it's not a matter of the pain of it really is in sort of setting it up and understanding it fully. But I think there does need to be, like anything else, a continual process of sort of looking at it. What are the new inputs? How are people doing this? And you can be aware of this through, analytics start telling you that. We've got, some of that stuff gets really interesting and deep, right? In terms of, if users go to here, they're 90% more likely to purchase all these kind of strange things, but then that shifts a little bit, right? Like, oh, we're seeing people doing more of this now, and so we need to adapt to it. In terms of frequency, you want to say continual, right? But that's unrealistic. But I think it's driven by seeing changes in parts of the business and wanting to do something about that, or the idea of trying to disrupt a little bit and moving a needle.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too, because a lot of it is dependent on the organization's ability to change too, right? Mm-hmm. And you can go produce 1 million customer journey maps, but if the problem that's identified is that once someone's purchased, the product isn't what somebody thought it was, or the experience, and that's out of the marketer's hand because that's the product team and they sit in a different building, then you end up having done all this work for nothing. Right. So I think like often when we sort of touched on this earlier, like an organizational change has to happen. You kind of have to get the marketers and the product team in the same room. You kind of have to get executive sponsorship. to make everything happen. Otherwise, you're producing a bunch of really beautiful documents that don't actually change anything at the end of the day. So it's difficult, right? It's very difficult.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk recently about sort of customer experience officers, which would this would be what they look at, right, across the organization, and kind of, not that they're managing a map, but, that's their focus, right, is to think about, the customer impacts at different touch points. So it's something to think about in organizations, and how they operate and how they think.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think we're between you guys and the bar.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I agree.
so thank you very much for coming along and asking.
Yeah,
Yeah, they already have the bar.
Good. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.